cooks yesterday? It's funny, the rapture happened and we're all still here.
I knew it.
I would have thought at least David Wardrop. So,
I just started cursing lately, John, so I'm with you now.
yeah. I tracked you down. I just returned your integrity Instagram posts and just a few general comments. Like obviously, you all are adults and you've got your Instagram account that you've been managing for several years, and you may have written what you would have normally posted and gotten, a lot of likes. You know what I mean? So take some of it as my opinion. I have a way that I feel like it's best to communicate vision and all that to the church. That is a preference. I am actually being used in certain capacities as somebody behind the scenes who helps edit writing for the church. So I think that my perspective is not just a selfish bias. I think that I do understand our voice. I understand what we're trying to communicate. I have some experience communicating vision. But if there's a certain way that you like to write things and it's effective for you in your personal account, don't necessarily take everything that I say as a rule. So there's room for flexibility in your personality and all that. But there are a couple places where I gave you the feedback that was much more like, hey, this isn't good enough. So like when you were given over to the curse of knowledge, I put that in to some of your assignments. So that is where you understand the person's story, and you show me a picture of somebody getting baptized, but you haven't brought me into their story. So I can't connect to that person because I don't know them. And you're writing about it like it was amazing, but I feel like I'm on the outside. It's the same way that you feel when a group of people are like laughing about an inside joke, and you're like, I feel like I don't belong. That's what happens when you write about something that you fully understand, but don't give me the grace to understand it with you. And so I was very hard on that. Grammar, I was very hard on grammar. That is just objective. That's not my opinion. That is just objective. When you leave words out, or when you write stuff in clunky ways and it doesn't make sense, or when you choose a complicated word or an easy word would be better. All of those things. Grammar, the way that you structure what you're saying, is just black and white. And if you're gonna be sloppy with the way that you write, then I'm gonna be sloppy with the way that I read. Right? Sure. I'm not gonna pay attention to anything that doesn't seem like you care about. Are you with me?
Yep.
And so if you're not good at grammar, then get somebody to help you. Don't put something out publicly with the excuse attached to it that, oh, well, I'm just not a writer. Well, then be a writer. Like, then figure out how to be a writer. And if you're not a writer, find somebody who can be and lie. You put out something that's written well. Okay?
There's a thing called Grammarly, and it's great for helping with grammar mistakes. It's
Great.
a Google add-on.
And thank you for the reinforcement, but we just don't have any excuses. Not if we're going to be ambassadors for the gospel,
Sure.
which means good news.
Yeah.
So if you want to go, work in a tech company where you're behind the scenes and it doesn't matter, you can write code, but you're not responsible for carrying the message of Jesus Christ to a world who's desperate and hurting and doesn't want to hear what we have to say. Well, fine, then go do that and don't worry about your writing skills. But if you're going to be here, you need to figure out how to put out something that's well written, and grammar is essential. So don't misspell words, don't leave words out, don't choose clunky words that don't make sense, don't make sloppy. You gotta get good at this. The reason I'm harping on it is because, and I'll do a whole teaching on writing, but when you really back up of what writing is a reflection of your thought process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, writing is your brain put on paper. And so if your thoughts are messy about an idea, your words are going to be messy. If your thoughts are convoluted, your words are going to be convoluted. And so the ability to step away and review what you wrote through an objective lens, rather than reading it through the lens of, I know what I was trying to say, which is what most of us, we never go beyond that. I know what I was trying to say, so I read it and I hear what I was intending to say, versus the ability to actually look at what you wrote and objective and say, what am I saying? Okay,
Yeah.
because the person who's reading what you wrote is reading what you said,
Yeah.
not what you meant to say, because they don't know what you meant to say. Okay, so you've got to get better at connecting what you were really thinking about to what you actually said on the paper, and that only happens when you're hard on yourself and you refuse to let a missing word or a misspelled word or a structured sentence that feels awkward and clunky slip by. Okay, so grammar is important, and that's just black and white. There was a couple times where I suggested that you do a better job of linking the picture some of you had unbelievably intriguing images and then took the post in a completely different direction. And and I'm left feeling like, what? You know, because it was a picture of somebody being baptized and, you know, all these different things, and then the post kind of went a different way. And that's not necessarily, maybe you can use that occasionally as a tool to kind of attract interest and then say something else. But just be careful. If you can, I think it's better to connect the visual image with the content. Okay, so do a better job making that connection. And some of you had unbelievable content and then a picture of the book. And it was like, the book is not inspiring. I'm just not necessarily moved by the cover of a book. I can find that. You know what I mean? Like, so give me a picture and image that enhances what you're trying to say, and say what enhances the picture and image. Make those two things connect. Occasionally, and in light of what happened in Charlottesville, there were several people in the room who wanted to comment on something like that. That's always present. There's always something that's going on in our world that's worth commenting. But if it's as important as something like Charlottesville, you have to be very careful not to, you have to be very careful to make sure that the connection is a real, genuine connection. Otherwise, it feels like you're just using a platform and popping a clutch, right?
Yeah.
It has to be a genuine connection. So it can't be, look at this beautiful baptism. Let me talk to you about my frustration, right? It's got to be, here's a person who is in a context of a diverse church. Our pastor just said, diversity is good. What do you say? Division is bad, right? And so I was talking to Junior about this because he used that line. I think it's great. That's a helpful springboard into a discussion about something that should be on all of our lips right now, right? That's helpful. So if you've noticed my Instagram post about it, I had to find the connection. And I found that old picture of me and Micah, and Micah's like looking at the camera like, I dare you to say something, you know, and then I wove it all together to say, I want to make a comment about this because of Martin Luther King's quote that it's the silence of our friends that's most painful. It just struck a chord with me, and so I had to knit that together. It took me a long time to make that not feel like I was just grinding an agenda and trying to make a statement. You see?
Yeah.
So if you're gonna step into those waters of, you know, the controversial arena that's always present, there's always an arena that's controversial, and you can always choose to step in it, then you have to be that much more cautious about how you communicate it well, because we want to be known for what we're for, and ultimately we want to help people, not just put an argument out that, you know, creates a buzz. Make sense? So you gotta do hard work to make sure that that's good. And then Nate Schwenk,
Yes.
I asked him to share this. I put a comment in there. Some of you can, you know, circle around with Nate later and see kind of what he wrote and how he wrote it. I thought if you're looking for structure to know how to build out a post, so some of you got comments from me saying this sentence right here needed to be a declaration of what you're really trying to accomplish. It needs to be one clear sentence that tells me exactly what you're trying to say. So I outlined kind of a format at the bottom of Nate's, because he followed the format really, really well. And so if you wouldn't mind reading that, I said that there.
Your form of your post was spot on. You made the connection to integrity, outlined your perspective, gave some examples, delivered your insight, and made an application.
Okay, read that again.
You made the connection to integrity, outlined your perspective, gave some examples, delivered your insight, and made an application.
Okay, you see that? So it doesn't have to be to integrity. Make the connection, and that's usually, you might call it a hook. So make a hook, have a hook, make a connection, then deliver your perspective. So here's my hook, here's what I believe about it, right? That's first two sentences or first paragraph. And then the third thing was give examples.
Yes, gave some examples.
So you want to support what you believe with several different examples. And oftentimes in our context, it's going to be a personal testimony. You're going to make somebody else the hero and show how their life supports the perspective that you're sharing. And then you're going to
Deliver your insight.
deliver the insight. And so the order isn't necessarily important, but these are 5 things that you should consider putting. And this could be 3 sentences. It doesn't need to be, you know, a book. But, you know, so that you're going to give an insight. It's got to be something that's sticky, memorable, helpful. So, let me see if I can pull that back up. And then ultimately make applications at the end. So that's awesome. You got me hooked. I'm convinced of your perspective. power to it, and I understand completely what you're trying to get me to understand. But then if you leave me there, I'm like, what do I do? You know, and if you leave me without any next steps, then I'm forced to try to figure it out on my own. That's not what we're trying to be helpful. So you gotta then say, and so here's one thing that you can do. Open up a journal and write 10 things that you're thankful for. Whatever, doesn't matter what the application is, but make the application. So some of you would, actually I think you, Nate, were talking about not allowing your character to be connected to your success or failure.
Yeah.
So it's a discussion between circumstances and worth, right? It's a helpful insight, right? That's something that we've talked about several times in here. But my feedback to you was, the structure was beautiful, but my feedback to Nate was, you didn't help me see why that was important, right? So you've got to make that connection. So just saying the concept and delivering the concept and putting it out there is step one. That's helpful, and you need to do that. But then making the connection sticky and memorable in a way that I can actually own it and carry it around for myself, that's the next thing. Same feedback I gave you guys for the leadership traits, the 6 leadership traits. I thought the traits themselves were excellent. I thought the layout and the design of that document was excellent. I'm assuming all of you got to see my feedback and all that. But what I was trying to push back was, now take it to the next level. Make it sticky, right? So you got all these responsible, all these things are great, but then come up with a phrase and be like, man, you're going to make it here, you better read it, right? Whatever it is, maybe that's not helpful for you. Maybe that's not a phrase we want to go with, but the idea, the principle behind it is helpful, right? Try to figure out a way to now push it to the next phase and say, so what do we do with it? Well, here's a phrase that you can chew on. And if you listen carefully, Pastor Stephen does this 10 times every weekend, where he gives us something that we can take away. And that's why people will say, I feel like you read my mail, and I feel like you were following me around all week. I feel like you said what I needed to hear. I feel like you were talking straight to me, because he's actually connected the dots well, followed a form like what we just discussed, and then given us something to do about it. Make sense? Yeah. So good job. Who's up for devotions? Sherretta and who else? Okay, you ready? Jesus, we're thankful for today. Pray that you would give us insight and wisdom, help us to focus and be prepared for being encouraged by you, and also providing feedback that will be helpful. And we thank you for Tim Farah as he's headed this way in just a minute. We pray that you would bless him today, that this wouldn't just be an opportunity for him to give to us something that he's learned, but that he would receive from us in attention and gratitude and in application, that we would take what he says and actually do something in our life that we feel honored in that. We love you, Jesus. Amen. Amen. All right, you come on up.
So around high school, when I first went to high school, my sister and I finally started to fit in the same clothes. Those of you who are only children, you're probably like, where is this going to lead? But those of you with siblings, you know where this is leading, and you're already mad about it. So she walks out, and she's in my flip-flops. I'm like, excuse me, are you leaving in my flip-flops? Maybe. So she decided she was not going to take them off, but we had to exchange some words over that. And then we exchanged a little bit more than words. We actually physically wrestled her down for a solid 15 minutes. I mean, there was hair pulling, there was teeth, really just loving sisterhood things. And she ended up winning. She's 5 years older than me, and it's a tough thing. But that's really not the point that I was trying to get across, because I really wasn't even mad about the flip-flops. It wasn't about flip-flops. I had other shoes. It was about the fact that she thought she could come into my stuff and take what she wanted. And I don't like that. It was about the principle of the thing. So right now we've really been in Elevation, we've been focusing a lot on David. So I've been kind of studying David. And one of the things that really stands out to me is his mighty men. And one man in particular, his name is Shammah, and he's found in 2 Samuel 23, 11 and 12. It says that when the Philistines banded together at a place where there was a field full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them. But Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck down the Philistines. And the Lord brought about a great victory. This verse, a couple verses, is really weird to me, because you have this mighty man of God, David's honored guy, and he has this glorious battle, but he's fighting it over a field of lentils, which is just glorified beans. I mean, he's fighting over a cane patch. And all the other troops, they're out of there. They're like, my life isn't worth all these lentils, but he says, no, like, I'm gonna fight for these lentils. So kind of like how my sister and our little fight wasn't really about flip-flops. Like, it wasn't really about the lentils, it was about the principle.
It's good. It's good.
And so he knew that if he let them come in and take this little plot of land, what's gonna stop them from taking the next one, and the next one, and the next one? And he says, right now, he was standing on a patch of beans. But if he keeps going back, and he keeps going back, soon, in a year, 2 years, 10 years, what is he going to have left to stand on? Nothing. And that's exactly how the enemy comes into our lives. He doesn't come in, he doesn't throw down and take everything you own. Not usually. He's probably going to come in, he's going to take a plot at a time. He's going to try to work you back and keep you moving backwards. So I know some of us, we handle real enemies, people who, come against us and don't want us to be in ministry, people who try to pull you back into a past life. But me, I know a lot of you guys also, my biggest enemy is within. It's my pride and my ego and my shame and my insecurity. And it's, a devil will come to me and he'll say, you can be proud of that. You can be boastful about that. Like, you can stroke your ego, and I stroke it, but I give him a piece of my land. And he says, but you're sinful too. And you remember those things you did, and you remember when you messed around with that guy 3 years ago, well, you're going to feel that shame like it was yesterday. So I give him that piece of land too. And soon I have nothing left to stand on. And he has worked me all the way back. Because we know that when we become Christians, we are kind of enlisted in God's army. And we're going and we're going to fight for him, and we're going to stand up for him. But in ministry, we've been called to be his mighty men. And those other troops, they were like, that plot of land ain't worth it. But we don't get to be mighty men and say that plot of land isn't worth it. Right. We want to be mighty men and women. We have to stand not on the land, but on the principle that it stands for. And we have to keep going. We have to say, no, today is not your day. Philistines, like, you're going to come into my land. You're going to take what God has not given you. God's given me this to defend. And I'm going to stand on it because it's not the lentils. It's about the principle.
Right.
And the thing about my sister and our fight was that she never, ever tried to take my shoes again. Because she might have got them that time, but she realized that if I was going to stand on that it wasn't worth it. That it wasn't worth it to roll around on the living room and get bit by her sister. Because sometimes the fight isn't worth it. And to be mighty men and women of God, we have to make statements saying, I kind of want that land, but are they going to stand on their principles? Are they going to stand? Is the fight going to be worth it for me? Because it shouldn't be. As long as we're standing on our principles.
Yeah.
Go, girl.
Go ahead.
You're part of my review weekend.
I love your humor. I felt like, the humor that you had throughout the entire was just, the placement was perfect. So I love your humor, but I did want to say, I love how right after you talked about David, you immediately tied it to your illustration beforehand, because I did kind of get lost when you went to David, but then you tied it back, it made a lot more sense for me. So,
Good.
The way that you speak is just mesmerizing. Like the way, you really engage us. And I love how you started with your sister and brought it back around and ended with your sister. I thought that was awesome. Great job.
Yeah, I think you worked the biblical passage, like you just worked it. So you brought it back and paralleled it with your story. And so I felt like it was like you took it from every angle and then you simplified it for me to feel like, well, what do you mean the plot of land that I'm giving away? Like that was definitely, I think, a great unique way of like kind of conveying the story in a real life way.
I think the way you formatted the whole thing was very seamless. Like I almost enjoyed being confused because you made it so clear at the end.
Yeah.
So it was like, wow. Yeah.
So let me just clarify that, because you said enjoyed being confused, and confused oftentimes we think of as a negative thing. But if we turn that to say appreciated the tension,
Yes.
you cannot have good communication without effective tension. And so what you did very well was not confuse us, but provide adequate tension to intrigue our interest and keep us captivated while we're going through it. So that's good. Well done.
You reminded me of this land poet with your rhythm. Like I It was just one of those things where like you had a rhythm. To
But a
what you
slam
do.
poet, really. Some are chiller than others. It was excellent, and I agree, it was very poetic, and you did an excellent job with it. I was gonna say more like TED Talk, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's the only thing I could suggest. No, it's excellent, I thought you did a very good job. I think that, what Peter said about tying it back together at the end, I'm not even glad you guys give criticism. At this point, you're like, no, don't even bother. The way you introduce this master class right there, when you introduce a topic, you have to introduce it with the end in mind. So, can you help us understand where did this teaching, where was it built from? Was it built from the lentils? Okay, so you were just reading, tell us about that, how did that happen?
Well, my dad just really loved the Mighty Men, so it's kind of something that I like to go back to sometimes. So that was just kind of a unique, just one of the more unique ones, and it has like more context. So I started there, and then I thought, but like, where has a time in my life? And I tried to think of like at first it was like more serious. What was the time in my life where I needed to stand my principles? And I was like, that time my sister and I threw down flip flops. That was just the first thing that came to me. So I did that, and then but I just knew that I wanted to tie in that at the end because if I'm not gonna, it wasn't gonna be worth it to tell the first
Were
story.
you tempted at some point along the way to shift out the story because you felt like it was too?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what was another story that you could have put in its place?
I thought about doing like a more serious one when I did stand on my principles like against people in high school, but it
And
was
found yourself lonely?
just like a more, I don't know, but like also I just feel like very distanced from that memory in high school, or like it's not that important anymore. But obviously the flip flop one like stuck with me, and it's the story I tell. So.
There is no difference between what you did here today and if you were preaching a 50-minute sermon. The simplicity of your concept, that it's not a flip field of lentils, it's a principle, right? That one concept, you can do it what you did here, 5 minutes, 4 minutes and 57 seconds. You can pick one story, you can work it all the way through, you can deliver the insight, give us a few examples, and boom, you're out. Or you can expand it, and you can start linking it now. So the field of lentils becomes a bowl of beans. And you start talking about Jacob and Esau, and Esau gave over his birthright for a bowl of beans. And you're talking about same beans, and whatever. And so you make all these connections, and you have other creative avenues, and you tell other stories, and you help us, you bring us in more thoroughly. But there's no difference. I think some of us think of a sermon as being this big thing that you have to construct, and a 5-minute devotion as being a small thing. The reality is, it's the same stress and the same intention, the same work that comes to make an insight clear, no matter how long your dialogue.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of work and effort that's required to make an insight clear. So you did an excellent job with that. The two places where I would say, if you were going to do this again, where I would say you can spend more time being intentional and mining for the exact thing that you want to communicate, because you got it all the way across. It was very clear all the way through. There was never a moment where I was confused. But I think when you threw out, we handle real enemies, and then you gave several quick examples of the real enemies that we face, I think that you could sit down and spend some time thinking about what are the real enemies, not just that we face, but that will mean something to the people that I'm speaking to. Like, what are our actual enemies? What are the things that we're fighting? So you gave a couple quick examples about people that are offensive and different things like that, but it was more like a general overview. I think that's a point where you could actually pull out a scalpel and do some real hard work there, and help us see, like, oh my gosh, I've never really thought about the fact that I'm giving over all sorts of influence and control of my life to this enemy, right? And so you could really help us bring insight there. So you could bring it up there, and then I think the other place was when you started going back into the Mighty Men, and you started getting a little preachy, which was fine. It was great. That was a little slant poetish. And you started to get a little preachy there. I think you needed an exclamation point to land on. So it's great to get fired up and excited and preachy, but you need to know where you're going. So if you're going to allow your emotions to kind of take over for a moment, it's best to know, like, so let me show you this picture. Like, you need to have a conclusion, because you need kind of an escape route, because you don't really know, once your emotions start raging like that, you don't really know where you're going to land. And I think a line would have been great for you, because you're such a wordsmith. And so I just wrote this down while I was listening to it, but something like, fight the battle of your life over your field of lentils. Something that you know that no matter what you say, how you get there, however wild you get, you know that you can just come back and land in hardcore, and we get to ride with you, and then feel like you were in complete control the whole time, because you bring us to the station and let us off. You know, I think that makes sense. So those would be the two things where I feel like if you were to go back through, I think you should turn this into just TED Talk.
Alright, so I'm not gonna sing. I'm not gonna do that. So when I was thinking, I was like, what should I talk about? Lord, like, what are you gonna say to use your people? He said, well, just tell them what I've been dealing with you on. So I'm gonna talk about reap it. So of course we know what it means, but I'll read it anyways. Responsible, empowering, authentic, passionate, integrous. How do you say it? Integrous and teachable. And these are all characteristics that we all agree made a great leader. So why are we here? It's to be those things. So as I was praying, and I was like, oh Lord, I want to say something that's really meaningful. He said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I'm just going to share from a place of transparency. I am dealing with a lot of emotions where I don't feel like I add up. I don't measure up. How can I, or will I be able to do this? Can I effectively execute what they're asking me to do? And I've been having to encourage myself, sometimes hourly throughout the day, to remind me of who I am, whose I am, and why I'm here. So the scripture that I thought about that came to me was Joshua 1:9. And I'm going to read it from the God's Word version. I've never read from this version before. But it says, I have commanded you, be strong and courageous. Don't tremble or be terrified, because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. My focus, our focus, should be to become the very best that we can be, and really giving God our all to work with and develop. So that means that you have to first see yourself as He sees you, and then you can't be anything without God allowing you to be that in the first place. So you can focus on who put you here in the first place and why He put you here and what He placed on the inside of you, then it'll help you execute those things that He's placed in front of you. So I think we all should, and I know I am, I'm setting my focus on reaping it. And we have to do our very best to do that in everything that we do here. It shouldn't just be one compartmentalized area. I'm going to be good in sessions and then fall off somewhere else. Or I'm going to be great in front of my mentor and then fall off in sessions. Or I'm going to be great when I'm seen and I'm just going to fall off when I'm not seen. We have to give our very best and see what God sees in us. The second thing is, in those moments when I felt like I didn't add up, and I can honestly say that I battled that thought daily, like I already said, I must go to the Word and see what God's thinking is towards this. Because everything that He's placed in me or placed in my hands, He's already equipped me with what I need in order to execute those things. And so I do have a second scripture, it's Ephesians 2:10. And it is, we are made in God's image. God has made us what we are. He has created us in Christ Jesus to live lives filled with good works that He has prepared us to do. So no matter what area you may feel that you're lacking in or you're just coming up short, I just want to encourage you to talk to yourself. Because right now, we're getting ready to get into the nitty-gritty of things. I feel we've got the first month out the way. And now it's time to kick it into high stream. And there are going to be moments, just because we're human and because a lot of us don't know what to expect, where we're going to feel like, I don't know if I got it. But you have to cast down those imaginations, those thoughts that are not from God, and remind yourself and remind the enemy that God placed me here for a reason. And I'm not here by accident. I'm not here because they needed to fill a seat. You know, I'm here because there's something for me to do in this season. So I'm just going to share a couple of confessions that I got from Pastor Gregory Dicko, and something that I say to myself somewhat daily. And it says, I refuse to throw away my confidence no matter what I see or don't see. I will not allow what I see to discourage me. I will not allow what I see to pull me down and make me throw away my confidence. I make a decision that I will not throw away my confidence because my confidence has a great reward.
Right.
Closing, I just want to close. I'm sorry, I'm reading my notes. Closing, I just want you to remember that you are here on purpose. You're not
That's good.
an accident.
Yeah.
Ever. You're not, it's not, oh God, what did I do? Why am I here? This is a waste of time. No. There's somebody here that God wants you to use you to minister. So we have to remember we're here to be reapers or pirates. But let's be that. Let's be pirates. Let's reap it. And let's give it our all. But remind ourselves who we are, why we're here. And don't ever lose sight of that because it can get foggy and cloudy. So that was my moment of transparency. That's what I'm dealing with.
Sherretta, I thought it was really great that you gave us practical things that you do to help with confidence, promises that you kind of breathe over your life every day. So you left us with like an action that you do.
I love that you chose to like let us in and talk about how you encourage yourself daily, even hourly, because I think it was so cool because we know like we all have an idea for the most part, like Sherretta, the work she's confident, at least I do, man, from seeing but for you to make a decision in your presentation to say, hey, I struggle too. It brought me in. It was cool. I love it. So.
The way you talk is captivating. Like I didn't even get to write anything down because I was just like, it's very real, but it's also a little terrifying because you're like, you better do this because this is truth and I'm telling you this. I know if I was a volunteer at a rally, I'd be like ready to get and like serve my butt off on a Sunday after 30 years. It's just like, yeah, those are me. These are my things. Who's am I? This and that stuff. So I'm like, that's great. I didn't even get to write because it was just the way you spoke is very real, very challenging, very good.
It's very comforting to have a speaker or a leader that's confident, and it's easy for you just to speak to us and to feel confident about what you're talking about, and just ready and willing to do whatever you say. So I love your confidence, especially at the end when you were just like, okay, this is what we need to do. I'll do that.
Very cool. I liked how you tied in the principles as well because that gave me something that I could apply. Like, oh, I could start saying that to myself.
I like how you pulled into pirate game with his little
Yes.
It was a fun little way to connect with who you were talking to. So obviously you built on a principle that we were trying to grow, right? But then you pulled in like, or it's even a pirate, like you guys, you had us the whole time. But in that moment, it was like, yes, that's really cool. That was our original.
I love it.
We all went, oh yeah.
I don't have a problem with pirates at all. I mean, it's negative, so we want to be known for what we're for, but I mean, sometimes you need to go ahead and just be a pirate. Like, that's not bad at all. It's great. What constructive feedback would you give to Sherretta?
When you were talking about the things you experience, and like you're saying, I deal with this on an hourly basis or a daily basis, and I'm going back to find ways to encourage myself. That was great, and I believe the truth of what you were saying. But I was kind of waiting for you to get more personal with it, and like give an example when you're on the stage, something that's really going through your mind and your heart, and how you deal with it in that moment. Because I'm a writer and you're a worship leader, so I don't have any context of what you might be feeling in that moment. That would terrify me. So I was waiting for you to really get the guts of what it looks like in Sherretta's mind and that's happening. So I believe what you were saying, I was thinking, I feel like she could have gone one step further of what it really looks like.
I got a lot of notes down from what you said. I think it would have been cool because I felt like you had sections. If each section ended with like a takeaway statement that you wanted to like close that section off with. I got one because you said the second thing I want to talk about, and I think I must have missed that first like statement that you wanted to give us, but I think just like to feel those breaks with your statements, that was awesome.
Yeah, that's it. That was excellent feedback. That's exactly what I was hoping to get to. The feedback that I'll give you, the principle with these telegraphic projects, right? So, how many of you have ever been listening to Pastor Stephen and you got it like 5 minutes ago, and he's still up there just working the dough, and you're like, Pastor, I'm good. I'm fine. Like, you can move on. And yes, and you Yeah. Don't be ashamed, but I do all the time. And why does he do that?
Because I remember it.
Right, and you know that. You're sitting there and you're like, okay, I'll just be patient. He's eventually gonna move on to something else. But he's a great teacher, and he knows how to like beat the dead horse, like over and over and over again. And when he's done, there are no dead horses, just Paul. Bloody Paul. Just the horse parts every day. And in that way, he's invited all over the world to communicate because he understands the principle of bringing people in painstakingly slowly, right? And telegraphing your punches and showing them, hey, here's what I'm about to say. Ready? I'm saying it right now. Here, I just said it. Did you hear that? Let me talk to you about what I just said.
Yeah.
He has this way of playing it out, and we've got to get good at that as teachers, as communicators. So my thing for you was there was so much brilliance in what you said, but you went through it quickly enough where I feel like half of us probably missed 40-50% of it. And you could probably cut that in half, just focus on the Joshua 1:9, and then go and take the 2.5 minutes that you would have spent on Joshua 1:9 today and make that 5, and every one of us would have still felt like, oh, there's more there. I could have gotten more out of that, right? So, for example, to be very specific with it, I'm not going to be great with my mentor and then fall off everywhere else. I'm not going to be great on stage and then fall off everywhere else. I'm not going to be, you have 3 of them, I missed the other one. That idea, in and of itself, could have been the whole 5 minutes. Of just saying, here's refit, here's Joshua 1:9. Let me talk to you about how this plays out in my life. And then we talk about the internal struggle of that, the circumstantial struggle of that. You talk about how it's easy to impress people, but hard to actually live with integrity. You could have built all that together and just made the whole thing, and because it was that good. So you threw it out there and we got it. Some of us heard it, and it's going to be helpful. But the hard part is, without giving us the space to really chew on it, like Pastor does, then it's going to be forgettable, because now we're not, well, do I remember that, or do I remember talk to yourself, or do I remember, oh, she really did connect the nitty gritty, we're down, that's right, I do feel that, this transition's happened, now I'm in it. And then confessions, I'm supposed to do confessions, those are all very good stuff. I would say you could have cut that in half and kind of expanded it out. It would have been great. One other thing I want to say about you, because you're a perfect example of this, in my personal life, I've always felt like my words needed to be what was most important. And so, because I was trying to be impressive, personally. This was my struggle. It's nothing to do with Sherretta right now. My personal struggle was I need to walk away feeling like I was impressive. So I've got to build this thing that's intriguing and interesting and fresh and different and all blah, 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 blah. When I finally realized I don't want to be impressive, I want to be helpful, I started putting commercials, like stupid commercials that I found, videos of raccoons, into my teaching. Same exact teaching, but now I'm okay taking the cheap shot because it's low-hanging fruit, but it's also very helpful. Like millions of dollars went into designing that commercial spot for the Super Bowl with their opponent, and y'all were crying. That's a huge win for me. If I'm trying to communicate and make a connection, why not make $1 million connection instead of me feeling like I can get it done with my words and be impressive with it? So now we'll shift back to Sherretta. Every person who knows you in our context is going to know that you have like an unbelievably powerful voice and has felt moved when they see you in your element doing what you do best. Not what you do best, but one of the things that you were excellent at, right? And so when you step up here to share, I would just challenge you as a way of challenging everybody. Go ahead and take the cheap shot. Go ahead and deliver the low-hanging fruit. Make the impact. Satisfy our expectations. So if you're an unbelievable designer, then show us some incredible design, right? Don't feel like you have to be something new or do something different. You have an amazing voice. Like if you come up here and just sang for a minute and about something, I would be like, it doesn't matter what you say at this point.
I love it.
And so that's not, so if you do that all the time, then I would say there's more to it. You can do that differently. But in this case, you're going to have one opportunity to do a devotional. And so I just challenge you, if you guys have something that you feel like is who you are, then bring your very best. Bring who you are, and don't feel like that's somehow settling. You don't have to do it the way that Sherretta did it or that Hallie did it. You do it your way and come in here with your best. And if it feels, am I making sense?
Yes.
Just don't worry about whether people are going to think like, oh, well, they didn't work hard. because singing like an angel is easy for Sherretta. So she didn't work hard. Well, no, she's lived her life, like 38 years of investment to get the brain that I have for whatever that's worth, right? That's 38 years of an investment.
Yeah.
I don't have to spend 17 hours doing something that's not me, when I can spend 5 minutes doing something that is me that will have 10 times the impact. Right? Does it make sense at all?
Yep.
So I hope that makes sense. I don't want you to hear me say, go ahead and be lazy, but that's not it. Be you and use your gifts. Thank you, Sherretta. This is Timothy Bear. Man of great integrity. I tried to convince everybody to let me bring him with me to Toronto. And then we had other plans for him, but that one moment should help you understand how much I care about this guy.
I have my passport and everything.
You still have it? Let's go. Where do you want to start?
Beijing, done.
I just finished my house. Let's next year. Tim, he was a producer with me at Matthews. I don't know if the plan can share. Go ahead. He was a producer with me at Matthews, and I feel like if you have perceived me to be a developer of any value for you personally, it's because I made all my mistakes on Tim. and he survived anyway. So there was a moment where he jumped up to fix the lock shop, which was this huge 20-foot screen that we had, and then the thing swayed like this. And rather than like sitting him down and us coming up with solutions and figuring out, practical solutions and leadership solutions and all that, I just texted him, I'm going to slit your throat. I've grown.
Knife emoji.
Was it a knife emoji? Yeah. I've grown some. Yeah. I wouldn't have thought that anyone would use emojis then. But Timothy.
Not that old, John.
Timothy, this is like 5 years ago. Timothy is one of those guys, another anecdotal glimpse into this guy, was a producer. And that was in a season where producers had a very clearly defined box of what they could be and who they were. I think now, generally speaking, across our church, we're much more open to, no, you're a leader. Your job is to lead people, and you have a set of tasks that you're responsible to execute under the envelope of what your title suggests. But your ultimate job is to impact people, to lead people. So it doesn't matter if you're an EK's producer, campus pastor, doesn't matter. We're all here to move this campus forward. That is true for you today, in part because his willingness to push the walls down and break the box. So as a producer, I would call him in my room and I'd be like, we're struggling with this VIP thing. I need you to help me create systems to make us as a campus more effective at reaching people. And he would spend hours nerding out on Excel and systems and all this, and he'd create this process. And it was gold for us in a season where we desperately needed that. Partly under his leadership, we saw our campus kind of be resurrected. After 2 years of being in Matthews, we had just lost our passion, and he was a part of our team at the time, helping us get numbers and metrics together to kind of bring passion back in the season. And he then stepped in faith into being a campus pastor straight out of production.
Wow.
No 2K2. We didn't know what being a campus pastor meant. We were all stumbling blindly. He was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I would say, maybe he'll admit some of this or share some of this. I would say that was not necessarily an easy transition. But 5 years later, he's got a ring. So, I know he's going to share about the code and probably lots of other things that are very powerful. And I'm really grateful to have him with us. So make sure you keep your notebooks open and take a note on my friend.
Well, I'm really, really grateful to be with you guys this morning.
I'm sorry, I have to come get my Bible and notebook.
I'm really grateful to be here. We're going to be talking about our code and maybe some other bonus stuff. We'll see. But I'm really grateful because as I've been thinking about our code, and you guys memorize our code yet?
Yeah.
Awesome. What's number 6? So it's about unity. Promoting unity. Number 9. Anyway, if I'm teaching our code, I should probably have it memorized. But I'm really grateful because it reminds me of Nehemiah. And you might not think, well, our code in Nehemiah, but in Nehemiah's time, well, before I get to Nehemiah, let me tell you, let's do Nehemiah first. In Nehemiah's time, the walls of God's people, the physical walls were broken down, right? And that meant that they were very vulnerable. And vulnerability can be a really good thing, but it wasn't in this case. They would keep trying to rebuild the walls, but every time they would try to rebuild the walls, the enemies would attack and they were defenseless. And so God's people just kept being defeated over and over and over again. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way. And maybe you're 5 weeks into 2K2 and you feel that way. Now can maybe start to be the time where you feel kind of overwhelmed and like you're not good enough to do this. And you're doubting whether God actually calls you here or you just heard wrong. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I never went through 2K2, so but that's what I hear. So that's a really, really difficult place to be. And it's a place that I've been many times. And, you know, growing up, my father, he called me a jack of all trades, master of none. Basically, you're mediocre. You're kind of good at a lot of stuff, but you're never going to be really great at anything. Never told me that he was proud of me. And it just felt like no matter what I did, that I would never have victory in my dad's eyes. Contrast that to my older brother, who was the really smart one, just the lazy one. And my dad would get so mad at my older brother, like literally just throwing him into walls, like just so frustrated. And as weird as it sounds, I just desperately wanted my dad to do the same thing for me. Because like Pastor Stephen says, the greatest compliment I can give you is to demand more from you. And that's what my dad was doing to my older brother in probably a not so healthy way. But he never did that for me. And I just felt unguarded. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I just felt defeated time and time again. And that's the people that we're ministering to. A lot of them are in that place. And honestly, a lot of churches in America are in that place. They just feel like they can't win. Nehemiah comes along, and he decides, I'm going to unify these people around a vision, and we are going to rebuild these walls, right? And so in, I think it was 52 days. I don't know, numbers are hard for me, but I think it was 52 days. They rebuild this wall, right? And now, you know, they had people standing in defense in the low places in the wall that were still vulnerable, while others were rebuilding in the high places. And they get this wall rebuilt, and now God's people have some strength.